the regulators will have a view, the airlines, the manufacturers, the systems providers like satellite operators and so on, all need to sit down and look at the best way forward to manage that particular issue. And I believe that's a much less technically challenging issue than that of data streaming. And I think it's also perhaps more urgent, and that's what we should focus on as a priority then and now. But what I will say is that this is clearly now a high priority to get this tracking, to get some improved way of tracking aircraft. And I believe everybody will now pull together to find a way of doing it and make sure it gets implemented quickly. Well, our role here, of course, is at the moment is simply observing. We're not involved directly in the search for the aircraft. We stand ready to come forward with any advice or input that any of those involved require. But once the causes of this tragedy have been established, of course, then we will be very much engaged with the regulators, as we have in the past, to determine the right course of action in terms of changes to regulation and changes to operating practices to make sure that this thing can't happen again. Malaysian Airlines has a good track record in terms of its safety performance. It's been on the IATA registry since 2006. Its current registration will be reviewed in 2015, and overall Malaysian Airlines has a good safety record. The priority in all these incidents, and certainly the priority here has to be to look after the relatives and the loved ones of those on board the aircraft, and I mean, all our hearts go out to those poor people who've had to suffer such a unprecedentedly long period of terrible uncertainty and so on. And understandably, this has created a very, very difficult situation for the authorities here to handle. And of course, with hindsight, I'm sure one could find various things that might have been better if they'd been handled a bit differently. But that's hindsight's a wonderful thing, and it's always easy with hindsight to look at these things. And I'm sure in due course there will be time for a thorough review of how things were done, and we'll all learn, and how to do things better next time. But I think the Malaysian authorities had an extremely difficult situation to deal with. They worked very hard to handle this very difficult situation. They've convened experts from around the world. They've got international experts from the AAIB, from the NTSB in the United States, from the manufacturers, experts from different countries, from China and from the United States, from Europe, Australia. And they've worked very hard to coordinate this group into trying to determine the causes and determine the likely location of the aircraft. They've worked very hard, and I, for one, certainly would not like to criticise them. I'm sure that important lessons will be learned, and let's focus on the most important thing. Really, is to do what we can to help those who've suffered the loss of their loved ones, and do what we can to find the aircraft. And those have been the priorities the Malaysian authorities have followed. And I think everybody looking on and watching this can just be grateful that it's not them that's having to try to deal with this very, very difficult situation. Malaysian have I'm sure, been doing their absolute utmost to provide information. Accurate information is what's needed, and of course there is very little of it. It's a terrible situation, and one only has to pray that it comes to a resolution before too long. I think the authorities and the airline have have bent over backwards to be transparent and to pass on information when it became available. And I'm sure that that in all the information they've given, the authorities here and the airline here have acted always in good faith. Why wouldn't they? And if mistakes have been made, I'm sure those will emerge in due course, and they'll learn from them. But one can understand, given the terrible situation that the loved ones, relatives are in, having lost their loved ones and having no really helpful information as to what could have happened. They're naturally going to be very upset if they feel that they've been given inaccurate information. And I can fully understand why they would be upset. I think we just need to be also understanding that those who are trying to give them accurate information are doing their best in a difficult situation. Thanks, Tony.